Check one. All right, we're good. All right, well, good morning, everyone. We are glad that you all are here today. Survived the rain and everything. The wind, I reckon it got pretty windy. I was out of town most of yesterday. So again, glad that you're here. We're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 13. So Nehemiah chapter 13. This is the last chapter of this book, but there is still a plan for the next 3 weeks after this week, looking at Nehemiah. Again, next week we'll kind of look at leadership of Nehemiah. In fact, you'll see some of those characteristics are going to be brought out this week when we look at Nehemiah 13. And then the last 2 weeks, as I mentioned last week, we will look at lessons learned from Nehemiah. So if you have not spoken yet, next week will be a really good time to help me out and let me know what all you all have learned as we have walked through this journey with Nehemiah. And then the last one would be, again, the practical applications, how we can take what we've learned and apply it to our daily life. And then also I mentioned I do want to talk a little bit about what happens after Nehemiah, because really this is the ending of, close to the ending of Jewish biblical history that we have in the Bible until we have the angel come to John the Baptist's dad, Zechariah, as we read about in the book of Luke. So let's look at Nehemiah chapter 13. There seems to be a little bit of I don't know if disconnect is the right word, but between chapters 12 and chapters 13, there's kind of a little bit of a time difference, and so we'll talk about that. So let's go ahead and jump right into chapter 13 this morning. Let's look at verses 1 through 3. Again, let's kind of go back a little bit. Again, he has had the law. His main objective was done, back a few chapters ago. They built the wall. They celebrated the completion of the wall. He had the priests come in. They read the book of the law, which, as many of you have mentioned in comments, some have never heard the law before. So they recommitted to the law. We talked about that last week, about commitment and so on. And so now we have in chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. On that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever come into the assembly of God, because they had not met the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned the curse into a blessing. So it was, when they heard the law, that they separated all the mixed multitude from Israel. So if somebody would summarize who this Balaam is that Nehemiah is referring to. Who is this Balaam? Now y'all know who Balaam is. One with a donkey. Yeah, we got a donkey. So we got Balaam and we got a donkey. And we know we got a curse. There was an angel involved, yes. Something special about the donkey. He could talk, very good. So we got a talking donkey. So that's where, that's where Shrek got the whole premise from Shrek. We got the talking donkey, okay? Yes, he talked back, yes, So yes, so in Numbers chapter 22, and we won't take the time necessary to go through this, but in Numbers chapter 22 is where we have the famous story of Balaam. Balaam was supposed to curse the nation of Israel or the children of Israel but with God, interfering, with God conducting everything, Balaam will actually bless the children of Israel. And of course, all that basically gets done through this talking donkey that happens in Numbers chapter 22. So Nehemiah, again, going back to Jewish history, and that's going to be important later on in this chapter too. He's making a reference to, why we do what we do is because of what happened in the past. All right. So the question. So then we get into verses 4 through 8. And I'd like for someone to, let me kind of do a little foreshadowing here. We've been in exile. We have come back. We have rededicated the temple. Now, we didn't really study that. That was in the book of Ezra. It's a really quick read. If you want to read Ezra, it's a quick read. But the temple was dedicated there. We have the wall completed. We have the book of the law has been read. And now we have this, that there are certain parts of that law that we are not abiding by because of something, that happened in the past. So, what's going to happen next? We've got all this. Nehemiah's come. We've done this, and this. So what's going to happen next? What should happen next? Everything's in place. Let me kind of give you, so those of you in here that's been married, think back, you had your wedding, you had your honeymoon, you came back to the home that you were in, you've got it all decorated the way you want it. You've got all the pictures up. You've got a job. Your wife may or may not have gotten a job because of the time frame. They may have stayed at home at the time. So is everything should be great, correct? Everything should just go smooth. You got everything squared away. But how many of that has happened to you all? We could go back 4 days from now and go, okay, I've got this done, and everything should be fine. And within the last 4 days, something's probably happened that shouldn't have happened or that you didn't want to happen. Well, the same thing happens here. Nehemiah has, with his leadership, all this has been done with the help of advisors, with the help of people he could trust. He's got all this stuff in place. If you remember, we talked about, he had people stay in Jerusalem. He had people close at hand. He had the warning bell or the warning horn that if you're working on this wall and then the horn goes off over here, you're supposed to come help because we've been attacked. All this stuff's in place. He's read the law. The people there have heard the law. So really, things should be pretty smooth from this point on. But then we read verses 4 through 8. So if somebody would, if you're there in Nehemiah, again, if you're in Nehemiah chapter 13, would someone read verses 4 through 8 for me, please?
Now prior to this, Elizabeth, the priest who was appointed over the chambers of the house of God, being related to Tobiah, had prepared a large room for him, where formerly they put grain offerings, frankincense, the utensils, and the tithes of grain, wine, and oil prescribed for the Levites, the singers and the gatekeepers, and the contributions for the priests. But during all this time I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had gone to the king. After some time, however, I asked him to leave the king. And I came to Jerusalem and learned about the evil that Leasara had done for Tobiah by preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. It was very displeasing to me, so I threw out all of Tobiah's household goods out of the room. It gave an order, and they cleansed the rooms, and I returned there the utensils of the house of God, with grain offerings and the frankincense.
Thank you. So what happened? So what happened?
They did not follow God's instructions.
Yeah. Tobiah, and I was kind of looking through my notes. Yes. I was trying to look through my notes real quick because as soon as he said that name, it threw me. Oh man, I am so sorry. Yeah.
He was from the opposition back in chapter
Yes.
6.
Yeah, I was trying to find it in my notes. Yes.
Sanballat and all those guys.
Yes. Tobiah was one of the original, I guess, enemies. Yeah. Yeah, in chapter 6, as Al mentioned, I haven't got it over there. Yes, he's one of the ones mentioned in chapter 6 as being one of the ones they were trying to trick Nehemiah into. He talked about it's chapter 6, verses 17 through 19. The enemies within, the nobles of Judah and Judah to Tobiah was mentioned in chapter 6. So where was Nehemiah in all this? He wasn't there. Where was he at? Yeah. And where was the king at? Where was Artaxerxes at? Babylon. Yeah. Susa, wherever. He was about 700, 800 miles away. So remember going back to the very beginning when Nehemiah asked to go to Jerusalem, what was one of the stipulations the king asked him or told him? Remember one of the questions he said? Yeah. He said, well, when are you going to come back? And so Nehemiah has come back to the king of Persia. And so we have read all these things that Nehemiah, with his leadership, has done for the nation of Israel, along with Ezra and others, others of the remnant. When we study Isaiah, you're going to hear the word remnant a lot. So that remnant has come back, and the temple, the wall, they have reread the law. They have committed themselves to the law. Nehemiah goes back to Persia, and whether he hears about this or not, I don't know. We don't have that recorded. Remember when we first introduced Nehemiah, one of the people has come back from the first group that went back and said, "Hey, the walls are torn down, or the walls are still in disarray." So at some point, Nehemiah returns to Jerusalem and finds this going on. So, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with what they're doing?
Guessing he's not a Levite.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he has no business.
Right. Has no business being there.
The priest has no business renting out to a non-Levite.
Right? So you got a lot of things going on here. You've basically got a room that is supposed to be really a storeroom, but what is it supposed to store? Grain. Yeah. Frankincense, I think, was one of the things that you mentioned.
Utensils to serve God.
Yep. Yeah. So this room was supposed to be there in order to help perform the duties that were supposed to be performed here. And they have basically, they've basically, as Al said, rented it out to this Tobiah. So there's a lot of things. And what else has happened? after Nehemiah has left. There's a second thing that's happened. Not only has we've rented this room out to this guy, but what's happened with everybody else? They haven't gotten what they were supposed to get, so therefore what wasn't going on? I think somebody said it. What wasn't going on? I think so. Huh. So again, as it says here, you discovered the evil that Elisha had done. This is verse 7. It grieved me. So they had to cleanse the temple. But what happened to I may not have read that yet. Yeah, verse 10, sorry. I also realized, I knew there was two, sorry. I also realized that the portions for the Levites had not been given them, for each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had gone back to his field. Sorry about that, didn't go far enough. So, what wasn't going on? Yeah, the Levites weren't doing what they were supposed to do. But it was because what should have been going on was going to help them in doing what God had asked the Levites to do, what was in the book of the law. So again, as most situations, you got this domino effect. If one thing doesn't happen, then this doesn't happen. And so we've rented this room out. We don't have the storage that we need, this tithe of grain and so on. That's in verse 5. None of this is going on, so the Levites have gone to their own fields. And I didn't know if that meant that they were going to their own fields in order to get like grain in order to do the offering. But whatever the case, if they were or were not doing the offering, Nehemiah was going to have to set things straight when he got back. So I don't want to say the children of Israel were very similar as they have been in the past, but just like in the book of Judges, every other chapter is, and again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord kind of deal. But you've got Nehemiah leaves to go back to the king of Persia, and then you've got these things that are happening. And when he comes back, now you've got, again, this room that's been rented out, and then you've got these Levites that are not, sounds like, are not performing the task that they are supposed to perform. Yes?
I'm not real clear. I know that all these things were supposed to be given to the Levites, the rain and all those things, but was that so that they didn't have to work to provide for themselves?
That's my thought, and that's the reason why when it says they went to their own fields, is it were they doing it for their own families, or were they still trying to sacrifice but was having to provide their own, which was not what was supposed to be in? So I don't want to throw these Levites under the bus, as we say, but I don't know if either they were doing the sacrifices like the grain sacrifice, grain offering, but was having to provide it out of their own pocket, so to speak, or were they just not performing the task at all? I'm not for sure, but either way, Nehemiah gets on to them.
Go back to the division.
Mm-hmm.
Canaan, Levites were told to give their land as a part of everybody.
True. Yeah.
So by implication, they were set aside.
Mm-hmm.
And the people were to
Support them. That is right. Yes, that's a good yes. I've got the New King James. In verse 10, it says, gone back to his field. Anybody, another translation for that word? Anybody? Yeah.
Mine says gone back to their own.
To their own fields. Okay. Farms. Okay. So it's kind of, okay. We were wondering if like was the term house or something like that may have been interpreted differently. Okay. Right. Yeah. Like as was saying, under the original intent, the Levites were basically they were in charge of sacrifices, and the people would give to them, and then they would then keep a portion, to do what they needed to do, and so on. So,
Evidently they
yeah.
were rebuked
Right.
because the house of God is neglected.
Yes.
They're not doing their primary job, they're out in the field doing something.
Yes. And I think that's why I feel like the sacrifices weren't being made. They were, as Al said, they were neglected. The house of God has been neglected. So yeah, I think they were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. Yeah. All right. So again, it kind of saddens me sometimes. You think of Nehemiah as hard as he has. I mean, he was a cupbearer for the king of Persia, and he has come over here, and he has helped lead a group of people in securing a wall about 1.5 miles in circumference in 52 days. He has overcome all these obstacles, not only with enemies from without, but enemies from within. And he has, had them come together and read the book of the law and recommit and everything to the Lord. And then he goes back to Persia. And then when he comes back, we read this in chapter 13. It's a little disheartening to me when you think about what all Nehemiah was able to accomplish. And then here you've got the children of Israel doing what they're doing, or at least this group of people doing what they're doing. Yeah. 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 Mm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, it does sound like they did, for sure. It goes back, and I'll read this real quick because I want to get into verse 18. So he purifies the storeroom and everything, because you've got Tobiah in there. But then also something that's going on is, the commandment to remember the Sabbath day. So there's going to be some things going on here, and then this I thought was very interesting, starting in verse 15. In those days I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. So what's wrong with that? Not supposed to work on the Sabbath. You've got this other group of people coming in, and so then in verse 16, so Nehemiah actually has to do something pretty outrageous, so to speak. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, which brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil thing is this that you do by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So there's an old saying, that if we do not learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. So, why would Nehemiah remind the children of Israel what their forefathers did? They're going down the same path. Again, it can get frustrating, I'm sure, because, these are the people that came back from exile. They're the ones that tasted, I'm going to use that phrase, that word, tasted the defeat of the forefathers when Nebuchadnezzar overtook Babylon and took them out. And so they have grown up in captivity, And now they're coming back. So, they've, I don't know, how many times have you all been frustrated at your children or grandchildren because they're doing stuff that you did when you were a kid, but you've already learned from it? Every one of you. And sadly, that is, sadly, we almost all have to learn for ourselves. I catch myself so often even with Caden, as young as he is, because he wants to say why all the time. And sometimes I'm just like, I know what I'm talking about. If you don't want to do it, then we'll see what happens. But you've got this group, and they've not experienced the kingdom of God or the kingdom of Israel and Judah, under the lineage and the heritage of David and his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on. They've never experienced that. Now, if you read Ezra, you're going to see that there's some people that wept when they dedicated the temple because they remembered, or at least they'd been told, the grandeur of the Temple of Solomon. And so when they rebuilt it, they just cried because of basically the difference in what they had and what they lost, and then what has become of that. And so you got this group of people that, they're having to be reminded, listen, you're coming back from exile because of what your forefathers did. Your forefathers did not keep the holiness of the Sabbath day, and what y'all are doing now is pretty much what they're doing then. And if God didn't like it then God's not going to like it now. And so he's having to teach them these basic lessons, so to speak. But sadly, we have to be the same. We have to be taught sometimes the same way and reminded the same way.
Tobiah was an Amorite.
Amorite, okay.
Remember back when they crossed the Red Sea?
Mm-hmm.
What were they supposed to do?
Destroy the Amorites.
And second, Tobiah's grandson was married to Sanballat.
Okay.
So he was not only an Amorite, which was been a thorn in the Israelites from the beginning.
That's true.
And he was one that they said, don't intermarry with those people.
Correct.
So all of that is now coming to fruition in this part of Nehemiah. You folks did everything that I told you not to do. And you did it.
Yep.
Look what's happened.
Yep. You're absolutely right. And look what's happened. Look, someone would, if you would, we got time. Verses 19 through verse 22. This is how Nehemiah has to handle this situation with the Sabbath day. So if someone would, 19 through 22 for me, please. Thank you. So what does he do? What's the extreme that he has to go to in order to stop the people from what am I trying to say? Profaning the Sabbath. Sorry. He had to threaten them. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. You don't. Right. Yeah. 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 So he locks the gates, and you know, y'all, we've got a lot of gates around that wall. In order to make sure that people don't open and close the gates, what's he got to do? He's got to guard it. It sounds like people that he can trust. You know, he basically puts his people on it at first. And then what does he tell the Levites? Yeah. Purify yourselves. And then what's their job? Yeah. So now it's your job to guard the gates. You are the person that's supposed to be our connection to Yahweh, to God. And we are going to remember the Sabbath day. You're going to make sure that the people are not going to profane this day. You're going to keep these gates shut. Well, then the vendors, undoubtedly, they started camping outside. Now, again, I don't know if people were like shimmying down the wall and doing business or whatever. I don't know. But for some reason, that ain't going to work either. And so Nehemiah, as some of y'all said, he basically had to say, you're going to leave or I'm going to have to do something about it. And undoubtedly, he had enough force behind it. It says that they didn't do it, they left. They didn't do it anymore. But I want you to notice that last part of verse 22, because he's going to say it again. Remember me. Remember me. It's interesting. In this 13th chapter, Nehemiah comes in with that phrase, remember me. That was a big deal. I mean, when you start dealing with the economy and money and what people want and what people desire, it can get people really messed up. And so Nehemiah not only was stopping the people of Israel from being able to buy all this stuff, and that means they were going to have to prepare for food and stuff on Friday, but then you're not only taking their way of doing things away, but you're also taking the money from the vendors that was selling this stuff. Now, Tyre was pretty far away. It's a coastal area. We'll study about Tyre in Isaiah. But they were selling fish. And, I don't know about y'all, but if fish stays out longer than a day, I don't know how good it is. Yeah. So, you're dealing with the economy here, and Nehemiah stands up to that. But that's very, very hard to do.
We've had that in our lifetime.
Sure.
There was something called blue law.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep.
You didn't open your business on Sunday.
That's right. Yeah.
This is not the last time that someone
You are correct. You are correct. Very much so. Very, very true. Yep, that's what I was talking about, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So, yeah. 400 years between now and then. Would someone read verses 25 and 26 for me, please? Here's something else that was happening. Maurice made a comment about this. Verses 25 and 26, chapter 13.
I rebuked them and called curses down on them, beat some of the men and pulled out their hair. I made them take an oath in God's name and said, you are not to give your daughters in marriage to their sons, nor are you to take their daughters in marriage for your sons, or for yourselves. Was it not because of marriages like these that Solomon, king of Israel, sinned? Among the many nations there was no king like him. He was loved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Even he was led into sin by foreign women.
Okay. So, another thing that was happening that Nehemiah had to address was the marrying of people outside of the nation of Israel. In verse 23, I should have read 23 and 24. That was my fault. You know how the 5 and the 2's off on the keyboard there. It said, in those days I also saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Again, you got the Ammonites, the Moabites, but yet there was this intermarriage. And so Nehemiah, again, going back, listen, have you ever heard of King Solomon? You know, the great king, and again, under Israelite history, he had the largest kingdom. I mean, David gave him a huge area, but Solomon and his greatness and wisdom expanded the influence of the nation of Israel. And he warns them, he says, even as great of a king as Solomon was, these foreign women, pagan women, however your translation is, they caused him to sin. And if you know the story of Solomon, he had a bunch of them. You know, he had a lot. So he's trying again to tell them, you're doomed to repeat the same things in the past if you keep doing the same things that you were doing. It's kind of like what people say the definition of insanity is. It's doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting to get a different result. All right? So he's saying you can't do this. You do not need to do this. Now he goes to extremes. What Al first read is some of the things he did to the men of Judah that was doing this. He, like I said, pulled out their hair. He struck them, and so on. And basically says, your daughters will not be wives to foreign guys, nor do you give your son or allow your sons to be married to foreign women as well, because you cannot. You're going to get the same result. And as great as Solomon was, he sinned because of this. So again, another warning. With that, if you notice in verse 28, I'm going to read this real quick because we're about out of time. And one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Elishab, the high priest, was a son-in-law to Sanballat, the Horonite. Therefore I drove him from me. Again, notice the phrase, verse 29, remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. All right, so he cleanses everything and so on. And then the last part of verse 31, he uses that phrase again, remember me. Remember me. How do y'all feel about that phrase? Remember me, that he says here. I got a couple more questions. Is that, like if we're praying to God, and we've kind of went through a difficult situation, but yet we've stood firm for God, is it okay to ask God to remember me? Okay. Okay. That's true, yeah. Protect us all the time, yeah. So, again, Nehemiah, looking back at what all Nehemiah has done, it's not, I don't feel like it's a selfish thing to ask for. I think he's not saying, hey, God, remember what I did for you? I don't think he's saying it that way. I'm thinking he's wanting God to continue to use him, to give him the strength to overcome these obstacles that he is facing. You know, he's wanting God to be with him. Remember me. You know, look after me. It's like I've said this before, I believe. You know, it's like that old Footprints poem that so many people had in their homes. You know, where the guy's seeing two sets of footprints, and at the end, you know, he looks at Jesus and he says, you know, Jesus, during my most trying times, I only saw one set of footprints. Why did you leave me during those times? And the last part of the poem is, I didn't leave you. It was during those times when I carried you. Those were my footprints that you were seeing, not yours. And so again, I think that's what Nehemiah is saying. It's like, you know, keep remember me. Remember when I do these, when I have to go through all this stuff. Yes?
Verse 14, reference back to it. Remember me concerning this, don't wipe out my good deeds.
That's true, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Remember the good, for sure.
And he wasn't in the cause of the bad.
Right, exactly, yeah. He was not the cause of the bad. I have one last question for this, and this is kind of again, next week we'll kind of be out of the verse by verse stuff. We'll look at leadership qualities and leadership characteristics of Nehemiah, and also leadership of the children of God. You know, we'll kind of make it make it practical in today's world too. Why is what Nehemiah did, again, purifying the temple, marriages, you know, all those things that he did, why is what Nehemiah did so important to God's plan concerning his promise to Abraham? Why is what Nehemiah did so important to God's plan concerning his promise that he made to Abraham? Faithfulness. Yep. Staying true to the one. That he would have many nations. Yep. Faithfulness. You'll have many nations.
Question, I mean, with the nation of Israel, had this not happened, would it have disappeared? And he promised through that lineage,
Yep.
you know, Messiah would come.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the bell's about to ring. So think about this as we go into next week. God made a promise to Abraham because of Abraham's faithfulness, his righteousness. Then later on, as we know the whole story, Jacob, Joseph, Egypt, Moses, Red Sea, Judges, the kings, but then the defeat. Israel's defeated by Assyria. Babylon takes away Jerusalem. Then Persia defeats Babylon and says, you need to go back. So now you've got this little bitty remnant that's now in Jerusalem that has built and dedicated the temple, that has rebuilt the wall for defense. Nehemiah has come in and brought back the law of Moses, and that will sustain the nation of Israel until the Messiah comes. Because if you remember, after the Messiah comes, about less than 40 years, 70 years after his birth, Israel's no more. And the only reason why Israel, the nation, exists is because of World War II and the aftermath of the treaty of that war. So again, this had to take place in order for, again, the promise that he made all the way back to Abraham to continue to happen until it's time for Jesus to get here. Bell's rung. I've got to quit. Thank y'all very much. We will talk about leadership qualities and characteristics next week. Thank y'all.